one of my first comments is going to be absolutely thank you to all of the speakers today, for not only for coming along today, but also for just kind of the amount of hard work and at a time when things were really busy. So yes, hello, welcome. So we're going to do the session today that's very much an introduction to the journal, so very kind of short kind of introductions to each paper. So as I said, first of all, a really big thank you to all of the authors and reviewers in helping us put this together. It's a fantastic collection of papers, and hopefully you'll see today just how much variety there is in there and how interesting everything is. So a really big thank you, well, to Ciarán, John and Cathy who have been working with, but also kind of the extended Eabhnat team for helping us and kind of trusting us with this, and a really big thank you to the Talmo team as well. It seemed really appropriate that we brought this to Talmo because of the way we've learned so much from Talmo over the last couple of years. So that's really kind of contributed towards kind of progress within kind of what we've been doing. So it seemed really appropriate to bring it back to Talmo. So just a couple of kind of quotes from our editorial to kind of summarize kind of what the special edition's about. So there has been that really big change within the teaching of the discipline over the last couple of years. A lot of it probably wouldn't have ever happened without the pandemic. So it's been really interesting that a lot of things we've been forced to do differently, but there has been that big change in teaching over the last couple of years, and we've learned a lot in the process. So I've already mentioned Talmo, but also learning from places like the Open University. So this edition is very much of a snapshot of research conducted over the last couple of years around the impact and kind of what we've learnt about about different parts of the last couple of years. So there's a mixture of things in here. So we've got the early emerging remote teaching, so that initial kind of panic and initial reaction, but also kind of the more established approaches, such as from the Open University, and then those iterations of practice as well. And in the journal, we have attempted to kind of put things into themes, but a lot of the papers kind of covered more than one theme. But these were roughly kind of school and university transitions, mathematics support, and also kind of looking at that change in provision. But we're so glad that there's such a variety in there, and it was so interesting to kind of work with the authors on this. Now, the format today, as I said a little while ago, is very much kind of introduction to papers. So we're going to have very strict 5-minute introductions. So speakers, be warned, if you go beyond your 5 minutes, we will be cutting you off, and we do have the ability to mute you. We obviously don't want to get to that point. We will give you a 1-minute warning to let you know that that's coming up. But given the tight timescale, and we've got either presenters or videos from absolutely everybody, so really pleased about that. But yeah, it does mean that we are going to have to be very strict with the times. There are 2 allocated question and answer slots, so we won't be taking questions verbally as we go along, but there will be 2 slots for question and answers. And as you can see, it's been recorded and it will be made available on Talmo afterwards. So as well as those 2 question and answer slots, we have set up a Padlet, and in a moment I'll post the links that you need. So please contribute to this, whether it's questions or whether it's comments. Feel free to chip in and just kind of ask questions as we're going along. We might pull some of those questions out for the question and answer sessions, but we might also kind of take ones kind of live as well. So I will post the link in a second. And then just a plug for the actual special edition. So as I said, this is meant to be kind of an advert for the papers in there rather than kind of replacing them. So if you are kind of interested in any of the papers today, I recommend going and having a look. So that is a very brief introduction because I don't want to eat into the time of our speakers. So let me stop sharing. As I said, I will post in the chat the links that you'll need today. So I shall do that in a second. So I'm going to post 4 links. So one's to the Padlet, one's to Telmo, one's to TMAT, and one's to the evaluation questionnaire, because I know there's a lot of people that will be coming and going today. So I'll give you all 4 links together so that you've got them. Mark, do you want to start sharing your screen, please?
Yep, no problem.
Okay. Right, so whilst I'm doing that, I shall hand over to Mark, who's going to be presenting on the kind of entries into to Coventry. So I shall hand over to you, Mark.
Brilliant. Thanks, Claire. So my paper looked at the early impact of the pandemic on students entering Coventry University in 2020 to 2021. I'm sure we've all seen that it was well documented that obviously learning was disrupted, and of course exams were cancelled in the UK. So there was a fear around the legitimacy of the A-levels that students were getting due to the triple lock system that the government brought in. Luckily at Coventry and obviously elsewhere, there is a tried and tested way of measuring students' competencies when they come to university, which is through a diagnostic test. And we've had that test for the last 30 years. It hasn't changed at all. It tests students on the different topic areas such as algebra, basic numeracy, trigonometry, lines and curves and calculus, so all the important things that they need. I should point out that we do have different versions of the test, but we only focused for this paper on the A-level test that we have. So we do have a GCSE and a foundation test, but for this paper we looked at the A-level. So basically for the 2020 cohort, obviously because of the disruption, we had to put this test online. Normally it would be in person and obviously in exam conditions, but we had to do it online. Students had to take it at home and on using numbers and Moodle. So it was the first time that we tried something like that. We had to put it together really quickly. It wasn't the best possible way of doing it, but at least it meant that the students actually did get a test to see where they stood. So in terms of the actual results, you can see from the graph on the left that actually the students in 2020 to 21 did as well as students in 2018 and did significantly better than those in 2019. However, of course, not all of these students arrived at university straight away after getting their A-levels. So I also looked at the difference between those that arrived straight away and those that took at least a year out and got their A-levels prior to 2020. And that's the graph on the right. And you can see again that the students who arrived straight away after their A-levels did better, and it was significant than those who arrived after they took a year out. And this was true across all grades except for grade B, which was slightly worse than 2018, but all the grades did significantly better than 2018. Or at least the same. So we only compared to 2018 because you can see there from the left-hand graph for 2019, there's a serious dip. And one of the reasons for that, we think, was possibly what's called the sawtooth effect, because there was a curriculum change. And these were the first sort of students that were seeing this change. So some of the issues that we obviously were that the test was taken online, and some of the students may have cheated. They may have taken a rest between the sections because we had to split it up. So we can't kind of confirm that, but we have seen similar results elsewhere. So, for example, in Edinburgh, they saw some similar results. So it's reasonable to suggest that actually, these results are good to kind of compare with. So it does appear that students are no less competent than in previous years. They did better in the sections to do with A-level, but struggled, interestingly, with these concepts of GCSE. So perhaps that's suggesting that, without doing an exam, they may be able to kind of understand the topics from A-level better than in previous years. So that's a possibility. But just as a kind of a sneak peek of the data I'm looking at now, and hopefully going to be submitting shortly, these findings are still true, but it seems as though this year's cohort, the 2021-22 cohort, have been significantly impacted. So these students that have arrived this September are struggling and have seem to be significantly worse than last year. So yeah, that's hopefully coming soon. But my watch is buzzing to say I've done 4 minutes, so I'm going to hold it there.
Yeah, I'm going to say you were at 4 minutes. So thank you ever so much, Mark. So as I said, we're not taking questions as we go along, but please use the Padlet to make comments or ask questions as we go along. So Jenny, do you want to start sharing your screen, please? Oh, brilliant. Okay. Whenever you're ready, feel free to make a start, Jenny. So Jenny's talking about A-level maths.
Okay, sorry. So this study was based in schools and colleges in England, and it was part of a pre-existing study that aimed to track the impact of the new A-levels from their first teaching in 2017. But we focused when the pandemic struck on what was going on there, and from that point onwards, obviously, we didn't get into schools and colleges as we had previously, but we still had termly contacts with teachers and with students. Reasonable sample, and we drew also on some data from university academics across 34 universities in England, which happened to throw up some data in relation to relative attainment. So apart from the disruptions that Mark's already referred to, what did we find? One thing that's important is that access to hardware and or appropriate bandwidth remained a problem throughout the pandemic to this last summer. Students commented particularly on much reduced access to teachers, you know, the informal sort of support, and to peers. They began to find ways around that, but still missed it. A large majority of the responding students over the 3 cohorts affected found it really difficult to learn effectively online. They commented on the difficulty in maintaining concentration, feelings of isolation, and the challenges in understanding in depth. So they'd often talk about being able to do the exercises, but not feeling that they were grasping the fundamentals. And by this last summer, so summer 2021, at least 2/3 of our teachers were still reporting a significant shortfall in the usual learning. But that's got some nuances to it I'll come to in a minute. Academically weaker students seem to be generally hardest hit, and mental health issues were also significant. So within mathematics, the things that both students and teachers pointed to as challenging were not the core routines. They were the problem solving, the proof, and applied areas, so mechanics and statistics. And that persisted even when they were back in centre and had constraints on their learning. Students reported aspects of their experiences that will impact them long term. So less opportunity for practical work, less opportunity for enrichment activities, for work experience, and for university visits. And then our academic respondents. So here we're talking about 44 academics working with mathematically intense courses in the first year or with math support. About 2/3 of those said that the mathematical foundations of their 2020 intake were markedly weaker and with a greater range of initial functioning and preparedness. And that was across the range of their students. The less easy to measure things were confidence, so reduced confidence. And this is important, and it comes up also in those who didn't have exams for GCSE, a greater incidence of unresolved imposter syndrome. And we really need to be conscious of that from an EDI perspective.
Jenny, you're at 4 minutes, so you've got a minute to go.
Thank you. However, there were gains from having to learn remotely. So both teachers and students also reported, the benefits of reduced travelling time, but enhanced confidence and fluency in being able to learn independently. And then there was a small group of students, largely high attaining, well organised, or perhaps on the spectrum, who reported that they gained from working remotely because they had more control over the pace and the focus of their work. So what we were finding as part of the longer study is that by summer last year, the teaching and learning of the new A levels was very much still in flux and still challenging areas in terms of problem solving, proof, and the applied strands.
Okay, right. We're at 5 minutes. Brilliant. Thank you, Jenny. So Sofya, do you want to start sharing? Yes. Oh, brilliant. Sophia's going to talk about the box set of enrichment video materials. So I shall hand over. Okay, so let me start the timer.
Good morning, everybody. So my paper is about engagement, students' engagement with mathematics enrichment videos. And to understand the context, we're talking about the first lockdown when the exams were cancelled. And so A-level students could have felt bored, disengaged, anxious about their transition to the next year or their transition to university. And in these times, our program was obviously interested in how that engagement actually could happen when they're not in school. For example, they wouldn't be able to access their peer support, or they're not learning with teachers. They could be emotionally drained, and cognitively, mathematics is difficult, especially at advanced level. So what would they do when they watch those videos that we created? And if they don't understand the mathematics, what would they physically, practically do? It's unusual to link mathematics enrichment with learning from videos. Usually we perceive enrichment as something we do hands-on, creatively, together, social interaction. We found out that the perceived benefits that we know from literature that happens after students attended mathematical enrichment events, well, actually in our case, they were very similar, apart from one. Of course, students didn't make any new friends, but exposure to higher education still did happen in our case. And we found one extra benefit, which I'll talk at the end. Learning from video could be cognitively demanding. You have to watch, to hear, to write. We were not sure whether students would be writing, or perhaps they would just watch those videos. And it could be cognitively beneficial when we know when the visual information is combined with verbal inputs from the teacher, with discussion boards, etc., which actually in our case we didn't do. So what did we do? We released 13 videos. They were released weekly for the whole period till the academic year actually finished. It was academics' choice of the topics. We approached higher education institutions in Wales, and we did create some teacher presence. We thought it was important. For example, here on the left-hand side, you can see a little bit from a booklet that was emailed to the students before the session started. The videos were still in making, but those abstracts were already available to the students. And secondly, with every video, we released this kind of email. The last part of the email was saying that we would like to hear from you. And if you have any questions, please do email us, and we'll ask you questions. We pass your questions to the participants, and as soon as we know the answers, we'll make a little extra video. And this was our approach to anticipating the difficulties with learning mathematics from video. I've got this little example of what we did.
So the first problem that myself and my friends came across when we were traveling to China is going through security. Because what we had done is we had just bought bottles of water. One of my friends had bought a 125 milliliter bottle, and I bought a 75 milliliter bottle. And going through security, you can only take 100 milliliters or less. So using two containers of different sizes, which don't have any markings on, can we measure exactly 100 milliliters? Have a go at measuring exactly 100 milliliters of water.
Yeah, it was a particular feature of all our videos that there was a moment which would say pause and have a go. So in terms of findings, there's a slide I'm just going to talk very quickly that there are 150 state-funded sixth forms in Wales, and 30 of them took part in the project. What you can see is that we had 98 students. The proportion of female participants was really relatively good. 18 students completed feedback, and we only found 4 students who agreed to be interviewed. So this is our very small sample. We can see from the participant data that in terms of free school meals categories, there are that many schools with low proportion of free school meal students.
You've got a minute to go, Sofya, you've got a minute to go.
Yeah, so we can see that our sample is skewed towards that. In terms of emotional dimension, students really were motivated to learn. They were missing an exam. They perceived the course as easy entry, no cost, no test, no commitment. And the topics were interesting. Also, they wanted to learn in a new technology, university-like style. They found the math exciting, but equally a little bit scary, intimidating. Those words actually appeared sometimes in one sentence. And of course, the format of the video format was hard, difficult, and overwhelming for them. We found that students actually, to overcome those difficulties, they were writing. All of them were writing, working out, breaking up video timetabling, etc. What I put in bold were those strategies that students employed when they couldn't understand mathematics. It was their preference to, first of all, to work it out myself. I rewatch it, I make note, I work it out, then I seek information such as I search internet, a forum, a board, and after that I try to get in touch with other people.
Sofya, we're at 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to cut you off there. As I said, I could listen to all these talks all day, but so thank you ever so much. A reminder that there is the Padlet, so do kind of comment and ask questions. I know there's been some activity in there already, but if I could ask Leander to share his screen. So you're going to be talking about resource uses, so I shall hand over to you, so make a start whenever you're ready.
Yeah, then welcome. I present collaborative work with Michael Liebendörfer. We all know about the problematic issue of starting university studies in mathematics, and we'll focus on the aspect self-regulated learning and motivation. During COVID-19 pandemic, we had a very unique situation, and also concerning university studies, we have new or more digital resources and fewer opportunities to collaborate for our students, and they experience problems with intrinsic motivation. So the general question was, how do the students deal with this new unique situation? And in this contribution, we focus on students' use of resources. The research questions, how do students evaluate the various resources available to them? How can we cluster students' groups according to the resources they found useful? And to what extent can a connection be made between the clusters and the biographical and psychological variables? So we asked first-year students from a linear algebra 1 course to rate the resources available to them on a 6-level Likert scale. And here you see the psychological variables that we assessed: self-efficacy, identification with universities, mathematics, and so on. So we refined these research instruments in a pilot study, and the main study took place in December 2020 with all the students of the linear algebra 1 course, and 89 participants participated in the study. So answers to research question 1. Here you see the rating of the students. All the digitalized traditional parts of mathematics teaching were considered highly useful. You see lecture notes, full class and small group tutorial. However, the digital resources were also rated generally as useful, yet they achieved fewer ratings of totally agree. The videos from external resources had also been evaluated positively, achieving approximately equal positive ratings as the videos produced or recommended by the teaching team. So the students also look for external videos. However, the most useful resource from the students was communicating with other students. You see this, totally agree with 58%. Our cluster analysis yielded 3 clusters. You see cluster 1 we called the digitals. They focus on the digital resources, videos, web pages, and videos recommended. We've got cluster 2, the traditionals, the orange ones, and they hardly rely on the traditional aspects, lecture, full class, lecture notes. And we have the gray ones, the all users. We found this very interesting, that we have these three different groups, and we wanted to know what characterizes these groups. And here you see our results in short terms. These digitals focusing on videos and web pages are all in their first semester at university. They are studying for a teaching degree, and most of them were women. They reported substantially less self-efficiency and identification with a study program, less self-regulated learning, and less social relatedness than all the other groups. The traditionalists had the highest proportion of males, non-first semesters, older students, and students in the mathematics specialist program. They showed a particularly high self-efficacy and social relatedness. So in comparison, we might consider the digital as students at risk due to their learning behavior and self-efficacy and identification.
You've got a minute to go.
Yeah, to put it all together in my summary, thank you very much. We see that even in the digital period, all the traditional resources are highly relevant, but the students also look for external digital resources. We found three different groups of students due to their use of resources, and we could characterize these groups due to psychological variables. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, thank you. So, Anne, do you want to start sharing your screen? Another reminder about the Padlet that's available. I'll keep posting the link because I know people are arriving all the time. So Anne, feel free to share your screen and make a start whenever you're ready. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. So I want to talk about a study that Diarmaid Hyland and I did in Ireland about the student perspective on teaching and learning during the initial part of the closures. So we surveyed students in July 2020. So at that point, they'd only had a half a semester of online learning. We asked lecturers in the universities in Ireland to send an email to their students to ask them to complete the survey, and we got 263 responses from students in 6 universities. Our study was asking students about things like teaching and learning, assessment, and their own personal experience and well-being. And we wanted to know what were their experiences and what would they like to see happen in the future. So there's kind of a lot of data in the paper, but I thought I would just try and summarize some of the ideas that the students were telling us about. So the challenges that they faced, just like previous speakers have said, the main one for our students was interaction and communication. So a lot of students said that they found it hard to communicate with their lecturers, their tutors, and especially their peers, and they really missed that. They felt isolated, and also they missed the kind of one-on-one interactions they would have in small group teaching in particular. This kind of connects with the next challenge, the delivery of teaching. Surprisingly, maybe students didn't really complain about the quality of teaching or the quality of resources or things like that, but they did say that they missed live teaching, they missed interactions with their lecturers, and especially access to supports like support centres and being able to do that easily. Motivation, as Jenny said, was a problem for our students. A good chunk of them said they found it more difficult to be motivated. They also found it that they were more anxious than they would normally be. And they also, some of them didn't like the move to more independent learning. They found it difficult to pace their own learning without the structure that they were used to when they were on campus. The learning environment, although most of our students, almost all of them, had access to sufficient hardware. They had laptops or iPads or tablets or things that they could use. About a third of them complained about their access to broadband. And this was a problem, obviously, when they had live lectures online. That was difficult for them, or sometimes in their final exams, they actually had problems because they were mostly online. The other thing that they complained about was assessment. They felt that the assessment was fair. 90% of them had online final exams of some sort or another, either quizzes or upload of their solutions. They felt it was fair, but they felt that they needed more advance warning about what was going to happen. But of course, remember, this was the first semester. None of us knew what was going to happen. And so I think in future, we just need to be careful that we flag things well in advance for students. There were some positives, again, things I think maybe Jenny has alluded to. The flexibility, students didn't have to travel to campus. Also, they were able to study when they wanted instead of being stuck to our usual university timetable. Some of the students really liked independent learning and liked pacing themselves and were kind of proud of their own study skills that they had developed. They almost all liked the online resources that were provided for them. And it was amazing the amount of stuff that lecturers actually produced. Very few students were looking at external
You were
websites.
4 minutes, and so you got a minute to
thanks
go.
very much, Claire. So there was a lot of material available, and they did seem to appreciate that very much. And for a lot of them, they liked the fact that the assessment was open book, and that kind of changed the way, a little bit, the way that they studied. So what can we say about the future? Well, I think it's important we prioritize student communication, interaction, whatever we do, whether it's online, blended, or back on campus. Students find it difficult to ask mathematical questions online, or at least the ones we had responses to from did. They don't like the fact that they need to use mathematical notation. It's difficult in emails or chats. They don't like not getting an immediate answer if it's in an email, for example. And a lot of them were embarrassed to put their questions on a chat or a discussion forum because everyone else could see what they were asking. So we need to watch that. We need to prioritize things like small group and supports, like math support centres. And we just need to be careful about students' mental health as well. So okay, thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. I'm going to hand over to Ciarán next for the question answer session, but do keep posting on Padlet. So Ciarán, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, thank you. I just realized that one part of the schedule is slightly out of order. It's actually just 2 more talks first and then the Q&A. So Stefan, are you ready to start? Share your screen? Great. So thanks, Stefan.
Thank you. The title of our paper is Increasing the Effect of a Remedial Mathematics Course by Switching to an Online Format During the COVID-19 Crisis, Evidence from a German University. Well, I think the title says it all. What did we actually do? Our data consists of 3 different cohorts of 2018, 19, and 2020, which is our COVID cohort. And all students in all those years had the chance to participate in a voluntary preparatory course, which is our developmental math course. It's an intensive course setting of 2 weeks prior to the first semester. And all the students took a math skill test and a questionnaire in the very first math lecture of the semester. And of course, in 2020, the preparatory course, as well as the skill test and questionnaire, were online. And so we have a kind of natural setting here. Our questionnaires, with the questionnaires, we raised various variables such as math performance, of course, preparatory course engagement, participation, gender, course of study, graduation type, some affective variables like math interest or self-efficacy. And with these variables, we can try to evaluate the effect of the developmental math course once face-to-face and compare this with the digital effect. So at first we put the 18 and 19 cohort because there were no significant differences in all these variables. And so we have a control group which consists of the 18 and 19 cohort and a kind of experimental group with the 2020 cohort. The course structure were the same in all 3 years, and the teacher were the same in all 3 years. So we have 3 research questions. RQ1, what changes in students' participation, if any, resulted from the switch to digital pre-course instruction? RQ2, to what extent, if any, does the performance of students change? And RQ3, are variables in the explanation of performance changing with respect to previous years? The results for RQ1, changes in participation. Well, we have a descriptive analysis, and we saw that participation declined significantly from about 45% in 18-19 to about 37% in 2020. However, when we did a probability regression with our controls, the participation still declined, but not significantly. So there's some cohort differences. And you can see that these changes in participation can at least partly be traced back to slightly different cohort structures from 18-19 and 2020. But the course engagement score, which is a sum score of attending lectures, tutorials, and solving the provided exercises, rose significantly from 60% to 68% in 2020. RQ2, the changes in students' performance. The effect of the preparatory course for 18 and 19 was 1.4 points in our skill test if the engagement score equals 100%. And the effect of the 2020 preparatory course was at 3.4 points, so 2 points higher than in 18 or 19. But we have some problems to discuss here because the comparison of in-class tests and online tests is problematic, which we have seen earlier today. And we've also found evidence of cheating, which is using calculators. But we investigated this, and both groups, participants and non-participants in 2020, cheated the same. And we controlled for the higher 2020 baseline score in our analysis. So the results should be there. Yeah, should be fine. And RQ3, changes in variables that determine performance. We found a gender gap in 2020 compared to 18-19 cohort, where we didn't find that gender gap. So women performed worse in 2020. And non-economic students, such as economic education, were less successful in 2020 compared to the 18 and 19 cohort. We don't really know why these changes, or we saw these changes. We had one random guess because women might be more affected in personal circumstances during the pandemic. But well, that's, like I said, just a random guess. Yeah, that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Perfect, Stefan. I thought that you were nearly finished, so I didn't tell you you had a minute left. Thank you. Eabhnat, are you ready to share?
Yeah. No,
perfect. Yeah, we can
see that. Ideally, we'll get it from slideshow. Is that okay?
Perfect. Work away. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Great. Yeah. So this is just a very short synopsis of a survey that myself and Olivia Fitzmaurice, my colleague in the University of Limerick, conducted. So we called this one "How and Why Technology and Practices Used by University Mathematics Lecturers for Emergency Remote Teaching During the COVID-19 Pandemic." It just rolls off the tongue. So very quick synopsis, just to give you an idea. We gave out this survey between May and June 2020. So this is like really early days kind of thing. We'd all just survived the first couple of months. We got responses from 257 maths lecturers from 29 countries, mostly based in Europe. Gender breakdown for mathematicians actually was really quite good. You can see just slightly more males than females answered. And in terms of age breakdown, if you look at the purple, the orange, and the green, they're roughly a quarter each, and that's roughly a quarter in the 30s, 40s, and 50s age bracket. Then the blue is over 60, and the yellow is under 30. So fairly good spread age-wise as well, and about 80% of them were in permanent employment. So just to give you kind of a quick rundown, first of all, on hardware and software used, and I'm just going to minimize this actually. So if you look at both graphs are showing the same kind of thing. The left-hand side is showing the hardware, and the other one is showing, the right-hand side is showing the software. And in the light blue, the dark blue, and the pale green, you're getting the lighter colors, the light blue, the light green, and the yellow are giving you beforehand, what people were doing beforehand. And then the darker blue, the darker green, and the orange are giving you what was happening during emergency remote teaching. So we asked people what they were using in terms of preparing for their classes, teaching their classes, and then communication with students. So you can see hardware-wise, before we went to emergency remote teaching, I mean, people were using laptops or PCs. But other than that, the only thing that the people were using for teaching really were things like visualizers in the classroom and things like that. Afterwards, once we were in emergency remote teaching, huge use on laptops. Visualizer dropped way off because people didn't have access to campus, and things like microphones and webcams and stylus pens, they went way up again. In terms of software, we saw much more variability. So again, the VLE, a virtual learning environment like Moodle or Blackboard or any of those, they were in use to a certain degree, but people were using things like LaTeX to prepare their notes or PowerPoint for giving their lectures a lot more. Once we asked about emergency remote teaching, you'll see that, you know, obviously almost everybody has moved to using the VLE at that point for some kind of thing, even if it was just communication. But even though the numbers are, you know, reasonably high in Zoom compared to what they were before, there's nothing really standing out as people using it all the time during the emergency remote teaching. And that's not because people weren't using software. It's actually because people gave us a list of 101 different types of software that they were using. So it was really varied what people were recommending. Everybody loved the one they were using, recommended it strongly, but there wasn't very much agreement. The other thing that we saw where there was a lot of disagreement was about the live sessions. Did you give live sessions online, and why not? So this diagram is showing you the themes that we got. The pink ones are people who gave live sessions online, and the blue are people who did not. And then the green are themes that were common to those who gave live sessions and those who didn't. So we saw, you know, nearly 3/4 gave live sessions online, and the people who did were really convinced that this was absolutely the best way to go. And the people who didn't were equally convinced that that was the best way to go. So the people who did, they're talking about things like how important it is to be able to interact with students, for students to be able to ask questions in live, that it was most similar to what students were used to, that it was easier in terms of supporting their students and giving them a structure, and that was easier for them to assess student learning as well.
One minute, Eabhnat. Sorry,
thanks,
1 minute.
Whereas those who did not give any live sessions online, they spoke about the issues in terms of students having very poor access to internet, because, you know, this was the initial months. People were actually really in lockdown. And they felt that it wasn't going to be as fair as a result. They felt that they themselves were going to struggle. There were problems with time zones, students in different time zones, and how were they going to put a live session on for everybody. The class was too large. They themselves didn't have enough equipment, or maybe the students didn't have enough equipment either. And in some cases, for both groups, the university had actually made a decision and told them that this is what we needed to do. So interesting to see that whatever people did, they thought it was the best approach, but there wasn't much meeting in the middle on that. Okay, and that's me.
Excellent, Eabhnat. Thank you very much. So the next talk will be at 10 o'clock. So I guess we will go to the Q&A now until maybe 5 to 10, and hopefully everybody can see this now. I'm sharing the Q&A, the Padlet. So maybe we can go through this until 5 to 10 and then give everyone a 5-minute break. I'm just looking quickly here. I don't know what particular order we should do this in. And for your talk, there was a comment, I just see it wasn't, you said something interesting in passing about not being able to unpick the effect of uncertainty from the effect of new assessment. Have you any further thoughts on this?
I don't have anything deep and profound to say about it, unfortunately, but I think, yeah, the students, they weren't complaining about the type of assessment that they had, and most of them had some form of final exam online and maybe some CA that was also online. But they really were, and remember, this was the first semester of lockdown, and they were really worried about not finding out in time about what they needed to do, or how the exam would be run, or whether even there would be an exam. And I think that was really the effective, like, you know, it was an emergency. None of us knew what was happening. So, but, you know, in future, obviously, if we do anything like this again, we kind of need to keep that in mind and make decisions fast, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to call out the questions that haven't been answered. I think, Eabhnat, there was one for you there, your most recent talk. I was lucky in that I had a webcam that could be used as a visualizer. It's on a bendy stand and has appropriate software for flipping the image. I got in early March 2020 when lockdown. So that's not really a question, it's more a comment about the software that they used, visualizer. I think all the other questions have been answered. So does anyone, I mean, I don't see a point in me reading out questions and then reading out answers, as everybody should have access to this. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask any of the speakers from this morning at this point? I think you can just unmute and ask.
Hi, can I ask a question then?
Absolutely.
It's a question for Eabhnat. I've just put it in the Padlet, but it's fine. Eabhnat, you said, like everybody said, oh, what we're doing was the best, was great. You know, those that did live sessions said, yeah, this is the best. Those that didn't do live sessions said, yeah, this is the best, which is incredibly positive. You know, I mean, I don't care that it's opposite in one sense. I just wondered, did you not encounter any negatives? So, you know, or is it the way you reported it? Is it they said it was the best of a bad job? You know, what everybody was going to be rubbish, but at least we did the best we could, sort of thing. I mean, yeah, was it positive or not?
The very first person who answered this survey answered every question with, I hate online teaching.
Okay.
And when we asked for a comment at the end, it says, if I have to continue online teaching, I'm taking early retirement. So certainly not everybody was positive about the experience. In the whole, people were, because when I saw that, I thought, whoa, what are we going to get back from this? So on the whole, I thought that people were more positive than I expected, but certainly no, it wasn't so much the case that people were saying, this is the best way to teach. It was very much not that. It was the people were saying, under the circumstances with what I had and the students I had to deal with, this was the best approach to take. Apart from, to be honest, the people where it was a university directive, there were some of them who were really unhappy that they had been directed that they had to teach in one way or the other, that they either had to pre-record or they had to do live sessions. So some of them were quite annoyed about that they had no choice. But no, certainly I should say it wasn't that they thought it was the best way to teach. It was that it was the best they could do with what they had.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm sorry I didn't spot your question. Does any, Catherine?
Hi, I was just wondering, we talk about exams versus remote exams, and I just wondered if anybody, you know, what sort of comparisons have been done, the old coursework assessments when we used to assess by coursework compared to sort of remote exams, and whether there were, what sort of similarities, differences there were either in student experience or in results, because I've always felt there's quite a big difference between assessing by coursework. Well, obviously there is a big difference, assessing by coursework and assessing by a face-to-face exam, but I just wondered about a comparison coursework to remote exam. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Does anyone like to address that? I'm trying to think if any of the papers dealt with that. Does anyone want to comment on that?
I think there were a couple of papers that talked about the comparison between online exams. It's been a while since I've read them all thoroughly, but I think it was more kind of comparing the exams rather than a comparison with coursework. But I don't know if anyone wants to chip in with that.
I don't remember. I don't remember, Catherine. I think, as Claire said, it's been a little while since I've read the papers.
Okay, thanks. I just wondered. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, unless there's any other questions at this point, there's going to be another Q&A session at the end at approximately 25 to 11. So perhaps we could all just take a a well-earned break for 5 minutes, and I think Holly is up next at 10 o'clock. So if we maybe take a little break now and rejoin at, is there a question in the chat? No, there isn't. Okay, so maybe we take a break now and see everybody back here at 10 o'clock. And just thank you to the speakers this morning. You stuck to time very well. Holly, do you want to share your screen? That's okay.
Yep.
Great, let me get my timer set up. Okay, so we'll get on because I have to lecture at 11 anyway. So welcome back everyone, thank you very much. And Holly, would you like to start, and I'll give you a 1 minute warning at 4. Thank you very much.
So our paper is on a two-stage investigation of the way maths and stats support practitioners had to respond to moving their maths and stats support online, and any challenges they faced of online delivery. So we looked at 2 different data sets, May 2020, so very much in that kind of urgent panic phase. So that data set came from the Hodds 2020 questionnaire, which was a survey that conducted alongside Sigma Network's first online workshop that got 72 individual responses. So the results from that survey were reported in Hodds 2020, but what wasn't included was a final open-ended question. So that was the part of the data that we looked at for our first data set. So it was a kind of a long open-ended question that asked practitioners whether we should be changing our approach or whether we should be replicating as best we can what we did face-to-face in this new online setting. And then the second data set comes from January and February of 2021. So after kind of a time of reflection and a chance for practitioners to implement anything after a result of said reflection. So we interviewed 12 practitioners that also responded to the Hodds 2020 survey, again from around the world. You can see the breakdown on the screen. And then we used thematic analysis based on the Thomas 2006 paper to identify any kind of underlying themes in the data, so any shared ideas that the practitioners had, and then compared how opinion had changed over the kind of the 8-month period. So first of all, we've got the May 2020 data. So this bar graph shows the 7 themes that were identified for responses to that last question. 3 of the themes were a direct result of the question, so namely, do not replicate, replicate, or I don't know. And then the other 4 kind of arose naturally as a result of the open question. But the key kind of result from these themes was that the most common characteristic was uncertainty. So not only was cannot answer the question the largest category, uncertainty was present in every single category. So by this, I mean, in the replicate category, we had statements of, I think we should be replicating what we do face-to-face, but I'm not sure how, or looking for the best option, statements like, I just want what's best for my students, but I'm not sure what that is. And then we've got the January and February 2021 data. So again, the bar graph shows 8 themes that were identified from within the data. The bar graph shows not only the number of times that a theme was mentioned, but also you can kind of see that the bars are split up into 12 segments. And if all 12 segments are colored in, that means that all 12 practitioners stated it. So the themes are in order of importance. But again, the key kind of takeaway from the themes in the 2021 data set was that the advantage of the 2 distant learners, so by this I mean any student that's away from the kind of the primary campus that is providing the maths and stats support. So whether that's the fact that that university has multiple campuses, or for example, mature students that now have extra childcare duties due to the pandemic, they now have, it's more accessible for them, they can use it more. And then on the opposite side, we've got this lack, this loss of unspoken communication. So things like eye contact and body language make it particularly difficult for practitioners to kind of gauge whether the students are understanding the material. This positive and negative, these positives and negatives remained the most frequently identified positives and negatives from both data sets. So overall, when we compared the 2, in May 2020, we were very much uncertain and quite negative towards online support. And then this slowly transitioned to, yes, in-person support has a lot of advantages that online support doesn't, but online support does also have its own advantages that in-person support doesn't. So returning to face-to-face methods is still very much positively anticipated, but practitioners are a lot more open to maintaining some form of online support alongside in-person support.
Okay, I didn't even have to give you a 1 minute warning. That's fantastic. My students will be so thankful. Linda, I think you're up next. Would you mind sharing your screen?
Yeah.
You're ahead of the game.
Well, I've something to follow up there now, Ciarán. So there we go. So I'll just get going. So so my name is Linda O'Sullivan, and I'm here today with my colleagues Deirdre Casey and Julie Crowley, and we're from Munster Technological University, which is the amalgamation of Cork Institute of Technology with the Institute of Technology Tralee. I work as an academic project lead with the Teaching and Learning Unit. Deirdre's coordinator of our Academic Learning Centre, and Julie is a lecturer in the Maths department, working extensively with the Academic Learning Centre in the area of Maths learning support. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview of our research and key insights from our paper, Asynchronous Online Maths Learning Support, an Exploration of Interaction Data to Inform Future Provision. So just a bit of background and motivation for this paper. We're all aware of the issue of student non-progression in higher education due to the maths problem, and the important role of mathematics learning support provision in that space in response to the issue. And we know that this issue is set to remain for the foreseeable future, and if anything is probably going to be worse as a result of COVID-19. And we feel the potential of asynchronous online maths learning support is relatively underexplored as such, even though it appears to be quite a cost-effective and sustainable approach going forward. So unlike its traditional counterpart, research on student engagement with and best practice in the provision of this type of support is relatively scarce, even though typically this type of resource has a huge amount of access and usage data available. So we were interested in understanding if utilising this data might enable online maths learning support providers gain a better understanding of student behaviour and therefore enable them to optimise their offering and improve student engagement. So in MTU Cork, maths learning support is provided through our Academic Learning Centre with support from the Maths department. In addition, the Maths department are also responsible for the development of our asynchronous online maths support known as Maths Online. Maths Online is hosted within our virtual learning environment, Canvas, and the target audience for this particular resource are first and second year non-specialist maths students. It effectively contains exercises, solutions, quizzes, links to useful websites, and mathematics software downloads that students need for their studies. We also utilise the announcements features for communication with students, the discussion feature, and more recently, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the bookings feature to enable students to book online appointments. Some recent enhancements that we've made to Maths Online have been the inclusion of video solutions to a past exam paper for a particular module that students were having difficulty with, as well as practice exercises in a variety of topics using Numbers. So effectively what we did was we extracted the student interaction data from Canvas and we discovered the following. Of the students enrolled in Canvas, 72% accessed Maths Online. Of these, 73% access content on more than one day, with 83% of students using the resource for 30 minutes or less. When we looked at the content usage, we found that we discovered the following, that basically the importance of the design of the homepage was crucial because effectively it sets out the stall for the resource. Secondly, the video solutions developed to past exam papers appeared to be quite popular and looks like something that is an effective way of engaging students. Thirdly, we were surprised to discover that the discussion feature was appearing quite prominently in the usage data, but students were behaving more as observers than participators or contributors. And that suggests that this is a feature perhaps that students are looking for to make this resource more interactive. Also, there was evidence of the use of the Numbers exercises, but it wasn't as much as anticipated. And lastly, we could clearly see that our Canvas module navigation menu clearly had to be streamlined so as not to distract students. So in conclusion then, our findings are that engagement levels with Maths Online appear quite high and suggest there's a real audience for this form of maths learning support. The time spent using Maths Online can be relatively low, and a significant number of students fail to return after their initial engagement. So in other words, the adage, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, is really clear here and is really apt. In terms of suggested enhancements to Maths Online, well, we were able to suggest the following. We needed to look at our structure. We really needed to redesign our homepage, streamline the navigation menu, and clearly signpost students to useful resources, so there was clarity around what the resource had to offer. Secondly, in terms of content, there's greater potential to engage students if this type of resource contains tailor-made content, like our video solutions to past exam papers. In terms of collaboration and interaction opportunities, this is something students are looking for, so we definitely need to focus our efforts on trying to enhance this feature to make a more interactive resource for students. And lastly, students are looking for opportunities for self-assessment and timely feedback and advice, but they need clear signposting that this type of resource is available. John.
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't give you the 1 minute warning, so that's my bad. Thank you. That was very interesting. Claire, sorry, Linda. Claire, could you share your screen, please? Okay, and whenever you want to start.
Thank you. So my name is Claire Mullen and I'm from University College Dublin, and along with my PhD supervisor Anthony Cronin and then colleagues Jim Pettigrew, Leanne Rylands and Don Shearman from Western Sydney University, we looked at the research question, what are the issues common to an Australian and Irish university from both the student and tutor perspective during the COVID-19 era pertaining to the use and future of online MSS being the mathematics and statistics support. So a bit of background about both our universities to start us off. Western Sydney University is a true multi-campus university. They have about 50,000 students. Their maths support provision is called the Maths Education Support Hub, and they have 11 dedicated tutors. Pre-lockdown, they were operating as drop-ins at 6 different libraries, which were there some days, not there other days. They have no centralized location because of the multi-campus aspect. And they also ran workshops and online forum. But during lockdown, this all changed and became one drop-in Zoom that was open 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. 5 days a week. University College Dublin has just the one campus and we have about 32,000 students, and our math support provision is called the Math Support Centre, and it's one central centre in our library with about 20 to 25 part-time postgraduate tutors working there. Pre-lockdown, as I said, one drop-in centre and we were open about 40 hours a week, but during the lockdown we had to move to booked virtual 30-minute appointments. So to investigate how this move online affected our math support provisions, I conducted 23 semi-structured interviews in October, November of 2020. And this involved 7 WSU students, 6 UCD students, 4 WSU tutors, and 6 UCD tutors. And the transcripts from those interviews were thematically analysed through 4 rounds of independent coding. They revealed 5 themes that I'll talk you through 3 of them now. So first of all, the usage of online MSS. So it's been reported a lot how we math support provisions in general saw a large drop in numbers, and that was very true in UCD and WSU. But the students we interviewed were users of online, and they noted that they felt they needed it more online. And it's already been commented, there's something different about learning maths online that makes students a bit more uncomfortable. So they really appreciated the one-on-one math support that we could offer, especially since they weren't able to talk to their peers or their lecturers as much. So being able to chat one-on-one with a friendly tutor really was appreciated. They also really appreciated the accessibility of our online format, especially in WSU with its multi-campus structure. There's a lot of traveling often involved to get to a math support drop-in. So just being able to sit at home and pop into a Zoom was great. In terms of how that needed more online, it's really down to maths being different. As has already been spoken about already, the communication of mathematical notation is very difficult. We don't have integral signs on our keyboards. And so when students, especially students unwilling or unable to use mics or video in Zoom, so therefore relegated to just the chat box, they found it really hard to communicate notation. This led to comprehension difficulties, both for students and tutors. Tutors didn't know what students were trying to communicate. They weren't really sure where they were coming from, and students equally had trouble comprehending what they were being taught. There was also a lot of discussion in the interviews around whether maths is more or less difficult than other subjects.
You've just less than 1 minute, Claire, sorry.
Thank you. And also the stigma around mathematics. The final theme I'll discuss in detail is the future of online MSS. So there was a great desire to return to campus and forget all these mathematical communication difficulties, but tutors did acknowledge that, that they had put a lot of work into adapting resources and they didn't want to lose those. And students and tutors also both noted that the online was flexible and accessible. So overall, there was a general agreement in terms of going towards a blended MSS provision. Two other themes that weren't in our TMA paper were pedagogical changes and social interactions. And that is what we found out from our 23 maths and stats tutors and students. Thank you for listening.
Muted. I keep being unmuted. Perfect, Claire. Thank you very much. I think John's there now. Jonathan Gillard's going to take over.
Yeah, hi all. Yes, so on to the next one then. So student experiences of online study groups and drop-in math support. Thank you, James. And yeah, over to you.
Thanks a million, John. Thanks a million. So I'm just going to give an overview of our paper here, which focused on how we ran study groups and online drop-in during COVID-19. So to start, we can outline what we did from March to May 2020. Holly diplomatically called this the urgent phase. I think we would have called it the panic phase, but we started off by basically just monitoring Moodle fora, responding to student emails, and we ran some online drop-in through Microsoft Teams, where students could just drop in, ask their questions of a tutor, and move on. In the summer of 2020 then, we kind of had a bit of time to review how this went. We engaged with the MLS community to see how everybody else was getting on. And we found, like them, that engagement had dropped off quite substantially from in-person provision. So we kind of reviewed and we decided that for 2020 to 2021, to kind of maintain that social spirit or the spirit of our in-person MSc, we would focus on online drop-in and we would organize online study groups where we would put students together. They would meet once a week on Microsoft Teams to work on maths and to help each other out. So in that year, we dedicated per week 66 tutor hours to study groups and 32 tutor hours to drop-in. The numbers in detail are in the paper. We had quite a high sign up, and even though attendance was still a slight issue, those that did use the services found them extremely useful. So we surveyed the students who used the services, and we performed thematic analysis on their responses. And some of the positive themes that came out were unsurprising things like how great it was to work with tutors, how great it was to work with their peers on maths to help each other out. They found the study groups were great in terms of motivation, to keep them motivated throughout the week, to keep them focused on their studies. It was kind of something to work towards each week. Small group size was great for asking questions. Students felt more comfortable. The social aspects there are kind of wider social aspects. This isn't just working with peers. This was stuff like just meeting other students, chatting about how they're getting on, discussing things other than maths, which was particularly important for first years who hadn't met any of their classmates in person. There were some negatives that came out, anxiety there. This isn't just maths anxiety, this was anxiety around working online, asking questions in online meetings, that type of thing. It's not contained in our paper, but interestingly enough, we resurveyed students in second semester, and that theme had substantially decreased, I guess, as students kind of got more used to working online. Low attendance in groups did not work well. That kind of gets back to the attendance issue, which was an ongoing problem. Unsuitable timetables there is another common theme. In terms of the drop-in feedback, it was largely similar. Students were very positive about the tutors and interacting with them online. Again, similar things like motivation. It was great that it was student-led and it was flexible. But a couple of negatives there as well, such as unsuitable timetables and online not being suitable to mathematics support. So just to finish up then, I just throw up, these are a couple of quotes. These are all contained in the paper as well, but a bit of feedback from students. They would look forward to getting together to study maths each week. Great to have a bit of social interaction. Gave structure and motivated their week, which was great. There were some negatives. It was a bit unconducive to the MSc experience. We definitely understand that. And they often found it a bit uncomfortable to engage with others in the group. But those were some understandable things. So that's the entirety of what we want to say there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Impeccable timing as well. And I can see Rachel has just appeared. So if you'd like to share your screen, and over to you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you particularly to TMAT for actually putting this special session together in the first place. I think it was a really important thing to do. So I'm Rachel, and I have a whole host of co-authors there, and we're all linked to the School of Maths and Statistics at the Open University in one way or another. Okay, so the OU obviously has been in the business of distance learning for just over 50 years. So I felt all of your pain back in March 2020 when you suddenly had to flip over to delivering all of your teaching. That isn't to say that we've actually got all the answers, and it's very much been a kind of iterative work in progress for us. And as kind of the world's moved on, the OU's moved on as well. So way back when the OU started, we were all told that we had to write our teaching material as if somebody who was a lighthouse keeper could study it and get their degree at the end of it. So Anne talked about earlier this morning about people feeling isolated. We were very much in the business then of how we could get people to learn in that very isolated manner. What we've kind of learnt over those years is really we don't want students to be in that isolated manner. So they may now learn more like the people in the top right-hand corner of those pictures there in a whole variety of different ways. But what we actually want them to do, and what you wanted them to do from March, was to actually be like that bottom left-hand picture where we've got those students interacting with each other within the teaching that we provide for them. Now, what we really want is not just the students interacting in our individual modules, but we want students interacting with each other across modules within our qualifications. We want them talking about what is it like to study Galois theory? What's that lecturer like for the third year that talks about mathematical statistics? So what my paper is about how we can get that community of maths and statistics, both students and staff, together to support each other in very much a kind of distance way without people feeling isolated. What I should say is that the OU is particularly complicated in this. We have lots of different students, including people like British forces overseas, people in prisons. So, and we work at scale. Those are the numbers down there on the right-hand side to give you some idea. So it's not quite as easy as just getting 80 people together in a Zoom call, which is kind of what we're doing today. So we've done various things over the years in the School of Maths and Stats to try and build this sort of community. What the paper talks about is back in 2017, we created a website which basically housed all these different initiatives. But the website follows the student life cycle right from first point of contact with the university right up until people are essentially alumni down there as well. So it talks very much about how we went about doing this in terms of thinking about that student life cycle. Most importantly, the fact that we need all the different staff that look after all those different areas on the left-hand side engaged in this. Engaged not just in terms of creating this site, but engaged in terms of interacting through a forum across this. So because we did this from 2017, we've got an awful lot of data because it's housed in the VLE. So the paper sets out how students use the particular site, bits that are felt to be more important than others. And we also did quite a large evaluation of both students and staff in terms of feedback, both for bits that they find useful and for improvements. So that's what the paper kind of sets out there. It's a bit of lessons that we learnt from doing this as well, so that if there were particular aspects that you wanted to take away and embed in a much more face-to-face traditional setting, then hopefully there's some tips that we've learned through failing over the years as well. And that's it.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Rachel. Matt, I believe you're taking the final presentations. This is leveling the playing field in assessment. Thank you, Matt. Over to you.
Yeah, sorry, just let me get I haven't used Zoom in a little while, so
no problem.
Just trying to remember where everything is. Yeah, so this was originally scheduled to be given by Laurence, but unfortunately he's teaching, so I'm jumping in to talk for him. So we're going to talk about a very wordy title, leveling the playing field in assessment. So the idea is that one module, and notice that there were some traditional gaps that exist, particularly certain groups that seem to disappear when we move to this remote teaching and remote assessment. And we thought, well, maybe this is just a single module, perhaps it's across multiple modules. So we thought, let's have a look at this in a bit more detail. So, sorry, it doesn't seem to be moving. There we go. So it's really giving us a unique opportunity to look at results under two particularly different teaching regimes.
Sorry, Matt, I'm loath to interrupt, but for me at least, your signal is very weak.
Teaching that we all hope we'll get back to in some form event with in-person teaching and your traditional in-person assessments. But suddenly we were thrown to normal where we had distance learning, we had remote assessment. Just give me a second to try and fix it. Okay, so I'll quickly summarize what I'd said before. So we were particularly looking at this two different regimes that we had. We had the normal teaching, where it was in person and your assessments were in person. And then we moved to this regime where we had abnormal teaching, where it was distance learning, remote assessment. And normally it would be an ethical issue to separate groups into two different ones and test them in this way. Suddenly we had the opportunity to do so. So we thought it would be interesting to see what happens. We focused on two particular groups, widening participation students and, as we called it, Black and minority ethnic. And I'm aware there's issues with this acronym and how we study them. The problem is that it's good because it's national, it's recognised, there's underrepresentation across the group, and it's a big sample, but it can miss particular issues with, say, a certain subgroup of that larger group. But then analysing that statistically is difficult, but it is moving towards a different measure. So for now, we'll use this measure, but I suspect if we looked at this in a couple of years, we might be using a different measure. So the idea was that we use linear mixed effect modelling for our normalised exam results and had a look at what happened pre-lockdown and post-lockdown, because our students sat an exam in the traditional sense in January, and then suddenly we were in lockdown, so the June exams were fully remote 24-hour exams. So they were given full access to their notes, and they had 24 hours to complete the exam. What we found, which was the particular effect I noticed in my module, was that lockdown seemed to have a positive effect on BME or BAME students. So pre-lockdown, the gap we generally found across most modules was approximately 0.6 of standard deviation when we've normalized them. In the 24-hour online exams, this seemed to narrow to about 0. It was pretty close to 0 in most exams. Now, it could be down to not having closed book exams, to these exams being open, but it could also be the change in learning approach. So this is something that we need to still look at. But it was an interesting effect just to notice this had happened. On the other side of it, we noticed that lockdown and 24-hour take-home exams seem to have a negative effect on widening participation students. So they were generally pre-lockdown, it was pretty close to 0. There wasn't a huge difference. And then post-lockdown, we suddenly found that there was approximately half a standard deviation difference. Now, there's lots of reasons why this might happen. So, for example, it could be with widening participation students, we had a laptop loan scheme, and we found that perhaps those laptops didn't get out to them fast enough, and they are traditionally less likely to have access to technology. So that would mean that they're then disadvantaged trying to access these suddenly online resources. And there's lots of other reasons that could potentially affect this. So it's something that originally we thought there might be reasons for this, but it'll be interesting to follow them through in year 2 and year 3 and see what happens with this cohort. Perhaps these gaps persist being closed for the BME and widened for widening participation, or perhaps it reverts to its traditional form and it was just a glitch. We also want to look at the data on a wider NTU scale, so that's across our university, see and look at other groups of interest. And also, we've particularly noticed in this run of exams we've just had was more traditional, the sort of normal exams. And there are some interesting differences, but there could also be issues with students returning from distance exams to their closed book timed exams with quite tight time frames, and they might actually struggle with that. So there's a few different areas that we can look at this. So that's what we're going to be looking at, and more details on the statistics are in the paper. I didn't want to overwhelm it in this talk. Yeah, so thanks for listening, and sorry for the tech disadvantages.
No problem, Matt. No problem. Thanks for getting through it. In the end, there's nothing worse than when the technology starts to give up on you. Yeah. Ciarán, have you managed to get this video to go?
It's working on my desktop, so just give me a second and see if it'll actually work.
Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk about filling the gap of in-person tutorials in a remote setup. My name is Catherine Palmer, and I'm a lecturer at Munster Technological University, located in County Cork, Ireland. Now, the case study came about following conversations we had reflecting on our experience of the sudden switch to online learning that occurred in March 2020. After the dust had settled, we found ourselves agreeing that while videos worked reasonably well as a replacement for lectures, the place where we really missed the in-person interaction was the tutorials. Tutorials are often the place where the learning happens, and the students have the opportunity to practice questions in an environment where support is available through the lecturer and through peers. If we think about the affordances of a traditional in-person tutorial, we see several important learning supports and opportunities. First and foremost, students do the work themselves, but they do this in an environment that is conducive to academic work, where questions can be answered, where lecturers can see students' work to address invisible errors, and where peers are present for moral support, so that students can work together to build working relationships with each other and with the lecturer. Many of these aspects are difficult to recreate in an online environment, and the loss of in-person tutorials left a huge gap in the learning process. From the conversations we had regarding future delivery of online tutorials, we were each planning on taking a slightly different approach based on the following online formats: live tutorials in Zoom, written homework with individual feedback, group work via breakout rooms in Zoom, discussion forum in Canvas, and formative assessment with feedback. So this was through ungraded Canvas quizzes and graded numbers tutorials, where the grades contributed to a student's overall module mark. Several different combinations of formats were taken by the different lecturers for different cohorts of students on different programs. To try and assess the effectiveness of these different formats, we examined student and lecturer perspectives. we conducted a student survey at the end of the semester to gain an insight into student perspectives and experiences. And we examined the effectiveness of the different approaches from a lecturer's perspective through discussion and personal reflection. Having discussed the different approaches, 4 main research questions emerged. The first question: how well do remote support formats address the affordances of traditional in-person tutorials? In the paper, we present a mapping of the affordances of in-person tutorials to the different online approaches. So we look at the affordances of the traditional in-person tutorial, and then we examine each of the formats to see where they satisfy them or not. The second research question: what are the positive and negative aspects from both students' and lecturers' perspectives of various formats of remote support in service mathematics modules? This led to a summary of the positive and negative aspects of each format, which are presented in the paper. But student perceptions did vary. For example, a class of postgraduate students found the breakout rooms very beneficial to share code and discuss outputs. But a class of undergraduate students working on pen and paper problems did not find the breakout rooms helpful and missed the fact that the lecturer wasn't always present in their group. So we found there's no one-size-fits-all solution to delivery of online tutorials, and when planning for delivery, it's necessary to weigh up considerations of class size, class experience, how well students know each other, and the material being taught. The third research question: what is the role of formative feedback in the absence of in-person tutorials, and what works well in a remote setup? In the paper, we present student uptake of the quizzes and tutorials and the student views on using them. In the last research question, we examine how students interact with each other when learning mathematics online. Peer instruction is such an important part of learning mathematics, and with the loss of in-person interactions, we were wondering whether students interact at all, and when they interact, during timetabled hours or outside of timetabled hours, and also what media they use for interacting. The data for this is presented in the paper. We also asked students about their preferences for future support formats. And interestingly, although only some cohorts were offered live online tutorials, and only one cohort availed of homework with individual feedback, respondents in all cohorts ranked these tutorial formats the highest.
Okay, everyone. So anxious to keep things roughly on time because I know people are getting away to lectures. We're now going to the Q&A session for 5 minutes. So Claire's kindly been linking the Padlet as we've been going throughout the talk. So could I encourage you to put questions there, or alternatively make yourselves known now by unmuting and sharing your camera. So yes, over to people for questions, either on Padlet or unmute if you wish. Okay, then. Well, if there is, since I'll ask a quick one, if I may, and it's about Rachel with your talk from the Open University. I was always fascinated during the pandemic of how the Open University would cope, in that they're well versed and experienced with distance learning. I was wondering, has there been any? You mentioned about community building. Were there any other radical changes to practices at the OU triggered by COVID?
Well, the community building we've been doing before COVID, really. So that's something that's been going on for quite some time. The biggest challenge for us was partly we always ran face-to-face exams in multiple centres, so they had to move online. Moving several hundreds of thousands exams online is not an insurmountable task for that. So that was one of the challenges. But I would say the other challenge for us, maybe more than you, is because our students clearly have caring responsibilities, lives, jobs, they were disproportionately affected by COVID because of, you know, many of them might have been care workers and so on. So that was our biggest challenge, really, the increased amount of support we needed to give students because of the pandemic, I would say.
Sure, yeah. It's easy to forget that the OU has a typical different demographic to most universities, where the majority is, of course, 18-year-olds coming into higher education for the first time. So the diverse range of backgrounds, yeah, you're quite right. I think it's something easily forgotten about from non-EU staff, but obviously very apparent if you're working there as well. I can see something on the Padlet which has had responses, which was for Matt's talk about are you planning any follow-up interviews of students? Do you want to add anything more to that response, Matt?
I can do. I mean, it's something we're currently looking at, because the way that it's gone for these students, they're mostly finalists now, the ones that we're talking about. So their first exam was traditional as such. Then they had a 24-hour open book. Then they had a whole year of open book exams, because it was just constantly lockdown, not lockdown, lockdown, not lockdown. So it just ended up being fully online. And now they're back to traditional exams. So there's an interesting comparison to be done there. And I think the students' opinion on that could be quite crucial, because we can hypothesize about these things, but let's be honest, it's how the students perceive it is what's actually quite important with this. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, time is wrapping up for the Q&A. I'd encourage people to have a look at the Padlet. Anthony has very kindly given a link to a complimentary paper for his work on student and tutor perspectives from Ireland on Australia. So I'd encourage you all to have a look at that. And also there's been some discussion about designing of online web pages as well. So please keep track of that Padlet. I'll now pass over to Cathy for some closing remarks. Thanks all.
I'm hoping you can see a screen about teaching maths and its application, which is the journal for which I'm an editor, and John, Ciarán and Claire were the guest editors for this SI. And of course, I'm preaching to the converted here, because you have all published in teaching maths and its application. But I wanted to just say a few words about that. We chose this special issue because we thought that something important and significant was happening, and we wanted to make a record of that experience, which was bringing us together, perhaps as a community of mathematics educators, of people who are upper secondary and up, which is the focus of our journal. We want to invite you to continue submitting to TMAT. We publish Section A articles, which are research articles. They have research questions. When I took over as editor, I was told that TMAT is theory light. People don't want to read a lot of theory, but there does have to be theory. There has to be consideration of how best to answer your research questions. And there has to be a discussion of the implications for improving mathematics teaching and learning at upper secondary to undergraduate level. We're really interested in publishing any papers that contribute to that debate and to that forum. We also have Section B. It's less well known, but it's peer reviewed in exactly the same way. And some of our papers in the SAI may have fallen a bit between Section A and Section B because of the speed of consideration. But if you've got innovative practice, but you haven't set it up as a research question and a design experiment, you might still be able to submit a Section B paper where you're debating your innovative practice, citing it within the knowledge that already exists, providing evidence of use and evaluation, and then giving a justification for wider use. So something like a pilot study might be very apt for a slightly shorter Section B paper. So please think about being an author. There are instructions on the website. You can see the website there. Please also think about reviewing. I thought the guest editors and the reviewers did a fantastic job with the number of papers we had and the timescales that we had. There were some really thoughtful, well-prepared reviews. Every paper that I saw got better as a result of the reviewers, and then it often got better again as a result of the editor's comments. So please think about reviewing for TMAT. It keeps you informed about what's going on everywhere else. It helps you write. You're a much better writer when you've seen other people's. You can pat yourself on the back often because you think, oh, I didn't write like that. It develops your criticality and empathy, and you don't need to feel responsible because you don't get the final say. The editor gets the final say. You're just providing wisdom to help the editor make that final say. I've put my email address there. So if you think we don't know about you, but you would like to review for TMAT, drop me a line and we will add you to our list. And then moving further up even, at the editorial level, we already produce special issues for CEFU. We've got a special issue for a conference on calculus that's coming up. We have this special issue, but if you think we could propose a special issue, get in touch and say about it. And we also have an editorial board and people who would be, consider themselves wanting to contribute to that community could think about joining our editorial board as well. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for making this a bumper. People keep saying bumper special issue. OUP keeps saying bumper about it. And I think it really was a very worthwhile endeavour, and I really enjoyed reading all your contributions. So I'll stop there. And unless there's anybody else wanting to say anything, I think that closes the conference.
Summarise that nicely, Cathy. So yeah, thank you everybody. You know who you are. So if you could help us by kind of giving us some feedback on today's session, that'd be really appreciated. There's the links in the chat there to kind of everything that you might need. So thank you for coming along today. Ciarán or John, do you want to make any final remarks?
I'll say thank you and goodbye, really, and enjoy your lecture, Ciarán. I know you have to disappear at 11, but good to see some familiar faces and good to see you all as well.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you all.